The Prime Minister has declared China has more power than any other country to halt Russia's invasion of Ukraine as the war in Eastern Europe continues to intensify. Key points: Mr. Morrison accused Russia and China of banding together to undermine international rules. Mr. Morrison accused Russia and China of banding together to undermine international rules. Russia is increasingly financially dependent on China, particularly as Western-led sanctions begin to bite its economy. Russia is increasingly financially dependent on China, particularly as Western-led sanctions begin to bite its economy. The EU has also said China has a responsibility to mediate talks between Russia and Ukraine. Scott Morrison has repeatedly tried to ramp up pressure on Beijing over the conflict in Ukraine, criticizing China's government for liberalizing wheat imports from Russia, and urging top Chinese leaders to use their leverage over Russia to press for peace. And Mr. Morrison ramped up his rhetoric during a major foreign policy speech to the Lowy Institute in Sydney, declaring it was up to China to demonstrate its commitment to global peace at a hinge point in history. No country will have a bigger impact on concluding this terrible war in Ukraine than China, he said. So long as they have a bet each way on this, then I fear the bloodshed will continue. Loading. Russia is increasingly financially dependent on China, particularly as Western-led sanctions begin to bite Russia's economy, and the two countries declared a new no-limits partnership just weeks before Vladimir Putin ordered troops into Ukraine. China has also abstained from several key United Nations votes condemning Russia's invasion and has criticized Western-led sanctions imposed on Moscow, accusing the United States of inflaming tensions and ignoring President Vladimir Putin's security concerns about NATO's expansion. On the weekend, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told his U.S. counterpart, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Beijing wanted to see the violence stop as soon as possible and urged Russia and Ukraine to resume direct negotiations. Mr. Blinken responded by saying the world was watching to see which nations stand up for the basic principles of freedom, self-determination, and sovereignty. Many nations have sanctioned and/or condemned Russia since it invaded Ukraine. There is no alternative. Mr. Morrison's declaration is similar to the one issued over the weekend by the European Union's chief diplomat, Josep Borrell, who said China had a responsibility to mediate talks between Russia and Ukraine because neither the US or Europe could play the role. There is no alternative. It must be China, I am sure of that, Mr. Borrell said. We have not asked for the mediating role, and neither have they, China. But since it has to be a power and neither the US nor Europe can be mediators, China could be. Australia and other Western nations have watched with suspicion as China and Russia drew closer together, and Mr. Morrison accused the nations of instinctively banding together to undermine global rules. Mr. Putin had chosen the path of violence in seeking to overturn the global order, and China had an obligation to respond, Mr. Morrison said. The world has heard China's words about its commitments to global peace and respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, and playing a positive role in the national community for a very long time now, he told the Lowy Institute. So it's now up to China and their leaders at this hinge point in history to demonstrate that these are more than just words. But I fear the early signs are not good. China is not the only country that has refused to isolate Russia over the invasion. India has also refrained from directly criticizing Moscow and has not joined international sanctions targeting Russian leaders and financial institutions. But when pressed on India's position late last week, Mr. Morrison said he certainly wouldn't put them in the same category as China, not even remotely. We want to see the world not throw Russia a financial lifeline, and India certainly are not doing that. I mean, they are not easing their trade restrictions on Russia, but China is, he said.